Let's be honest about something. When a king falls, the noise gets louder. When a dynasty starts cracking at the foundation, the people closest to it get the most defensive. And right now, in the middle of what was supposed to be Drake's greatest comeback moment, his most triumphant return, the numbers are telling a completely different story. One that Drake's camp absolutely does not want you to read too carefully. Because beneath the record-breaking headlines, beneath the chest-thumping social media posts, and beneath the 3-album rollout that was designed to suffocate every other artist in the room, something is melting. And it's melting fast. Welcome back. If this is your first time here, you landed on the right video at exactly the right moment. What we're about to break down today goes far deeper than just streaming numbers and chart positions. We're talking about the architecture of a carefully constructed illusion and what happens when the real data starts poking holes through it. We're going to talk about Drake's Iceman project, the very suspicious drop in streams that happened almost immediately after launch, the record it broke that nobody should be celebrating, the betting odds on Kendrick Lamar's next album that are louder than any official announcement, and a growing army of rappers and media figures who are so deep in their jealousy of Kendrick Lamar that they're willing to burn the entire culture down just to try and dim his light. This is a story about ego, survival, propaganda, and the terrifying reality that one man who hasn't even said a word yet is still running the rap conversation in 2026. If you're new here and this type of deep dive content is exactly what you've been looking for, hit that subscribe button right now. We are not a recap channel. We are a breakdown channel. And by the end of this video, you will see the full picture. Let's start with the numbers, because numbers never lie, even when the people presenting them try to spin them into something else entirely. Anthony Fantano, one of the most respected and analytically honest music critics operating in this space, recently put a spotlight on something that the Drake fanbase desperately wanted to bury. In the first 2 weeks following the release of Iceman and its companion projects, the streaming trajectory went off a cliff. Not a gradual slide. Not the normal industry cooldown. A cliff. On May 24th, just over a week after the album's release, Iceman was pulling in approximately 28 million streams in a single day. Now, before you start saying that sounds impressive, understand the context. On opening day, that same album was generating over 130 million streams. That's not a dip. That's a 100 million stream evaporation in less than 10 days. And within that same 24-hour window on the 24th, the project had already fallen another 15% from just the day before. Now here's what the Drake defenders will immediately say: all albums drop after week 1. That's normal. And they're right to a point. A 50% decline after the first week is textbook. It happens to almost every major release. But what we're watching with Iceman isn't a normal decay curve. What we're watching is a second-day collapse that should have sent alarm bells ringing inside every camp involved in this rollout. When your second-day numbers are already screaming panic, the long-term shelf life conversation becomes very short, very fast. And that was always the real question here, not whether the project would open big. Of course it was going to open big. Drake has a machine. He has infrastructure. He has years of accumulated casual listeners who would click play simply out of curiosity. But the question was always, are people going back? Is this music living inside people? Is it becoming part of their daily rotation? And the data right now is pointing in one extremely unflattering direction. Fantano framed it perfectly when he pointed out that part of the problem was structural. You cannot drop 40 songs across 3 projects and expect that volume to work in your favor in 2026. The streaming era does not reward sprawl, it rewards obsession. It rewards the record people cannot stop going back to. And when you dilute your own rollout by spreading the attention across 3 separate projects, you are essentially cannibalizing your own momentum. The traffic that should have been crashing into one singular experience was spread thin across 3 doors. And when you're getting honest reviews suggesting the music is mid across the board, those doors don't all stay open very long. But here's where it gets even more revealing. Let's talk about a specific record that Drake broke, a record that his fans were celebrating loudly, but that actually tells a story of its own that nobody seems willing to say out loud. Make Them Cry, the opening track off Iceman, briefly hit #1 on the Spotify global chart. And his fanbase treated this like some kind of historic coronation. People were comparing it to legends. They were saying it was better than Not Like Us. They were calling it the greatest rap intro of a generation. The hype was stratospheric. But then something happened that no amount of spin can fully explain away. Make Them Cry fell off the Spotify global chart entirely in less than 12 days. 12 days. That is now the official record for the shortest run at #1 on that chart. not a record you want, not a milestone you frame and put on the wall. And what makes this particularly telling is not just the speed of the exit, it's what the exit actually means. If even Drake's own fans were genuinely gravitating toward this project, they would be returning to the intro. They would be cycling through the whole thing. But when an intro track, a song that exists literally to pull you into the world of the album, vanishes from charts within less than 2 weeks, what it's really telling you is that people played it once, walked away, and never went back to press play. Not even the people who said they loved it. And that pattern, more than any single data point, tells you everything you need to know about the staying power of this project. Now compare that to what Kendrick's records did last year. Songs from GNX stayed charting for weeks and months. They didn't just spike, they embedded themselves into culture. They became something people returned to because the music itself was giving them something. That is the difference between noise and resonance. And right now, all the data suggests that Iceman was noise. And if we need one more piece of this puzzle before we get into the really explosive part of today's conversation, let's talk about the Janice record. Multiple projections have already shown that Drake's #1 single is sliding toward #2 in its second week. That matters because Drake has not had a #1 record hold its position for longer than a week since 2018. Not Certified Lover Boy. Not For All the Dogs. And now, not Iceman either. There is a pattern here that is impossible to ignore. And if you believe in patterns and in music, patterns are everything, then the era of Drake dominating charts with staying power ended years ago. What we're watching now is a very expensive, very loudly announced attempt to pretend otherwise. Here's another angle worth examining. A lot of people listening to these projects on release week were not Drake fans. They were critics, analysts, curious listeners, people who hadn't checked for Drake since Views, but wanted to see what the big deal was. Those are not repeat listeners. Those are first and final listeners. They streamed it to form an opinion, they formed one, and they moved on. When you factor that out of the equation, the actual loyal listener base driving those numbers becomes even smaller than they appear, and the decline makes even more sense. Now let's shift gears, because while Drake's numbers are quietly collapsing, something else entirely is happening on the other side of this story. And this part is genuinely fascinating. Gambling analytics company Kashi, an organization that literally makes their living by correctly predicting outcomes in music and entertainment, has now placed Kendrick Lamar's odds of having a #1 album in 2026 at 55%. Let that number absorb for a second. There is no announced project. There is no official rollout. There is no marketing campaign, no teaser, no leaked tracklist, no feature confirmation. Kendrick Lamar has said absolutely nothing publicly. And professional oddsmakers who risk their credibility and their business model on being right are giving him better than even odds to top the charts this year. That is not a small thing. That is the industry quietly acknowledging what everyone paying attention already knows. Kendrick Lamar does not need an announcement to dominate. He could drop a project at 2 in the morning on a random Tuesday, and the streaming services would crash before sunrise. The post from Kashi announcing these odds pulled in nearly 7 million views. 7 million views for odds on an album that doesn't officially exist yet. While Drake just dropped 3 projects and the entire conversation has already pivoted to asking when Kendrick is coming. Drake fans, Drake himself, music analysts, hip-hop heads across every platform, the dominant question circling the culture right now is not, what do you think of Iceman? The dominant question is, when is Kendrick dropping? Think about what that means. Drake's own Rollout, the biggest release of his recent career, 3 albums simultaneously, an intentionally designed chart takeover, could not redirect the cultural narrative away from his own rival. The man who hasn't released a project isn't just competing with Iceman. He's outrunning it without breaking a sweat. He is still the gravitational center of the rap conversation while sitting completely still. And you know what's particularly interesting? Some of the people asking, when is Kendrick dropping, most aggressively are Drake supporters. Because somewhere beneath all the defending of mid-music and chart manipulation and 3-album rollouts, even they know that the comparison they actually fear is coming. And they're not ready for it. This brings us to the part of the conversation that needs to be said plainly, clearly, and without apology. There is a coordinated effort happening right now to rewrite history, to revise what occurred over the last 2 years, to retroactively diminish what Kendrick Lamar accomplished and to artificially inflate Drake's current standing. And it is not just coming from Drake fans and comment sections. It is coming from rappers with Hall of Fame resumes. It is coming from media personalities with large platforms. It is coming from industry figures who should know better. And it is all happening at the same time, in the same direction, with the same talking points, which tells you it is not organic. It is organized. Let's start with the rappers, because this is where it gets genuinely uncomfortable. Big Sean. Here is a man who has spent literally a decade living in the shadow of comparisons to Kendrick Lamar. Since the Controlverse in 2013, every single career moment Big Sean has been measured against what Kendrick was doing simultaneously. His last album was received as a lesser, diluted version of Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers, a comparison so brutal and so precise that it essentially became the defining narrative of the entire release. His last real moment of public engagement ended almost immediately because Kendrick dropped something that overshadowed it completely. And so when Drake made that post, the one comparing himself to Michael Jackson, the one declaring himself the carrier of the entire rap game, the one that was transparently anti-Kendrick in its framing, guess who was right there in the comments throwing fire emojis and celebrating? Big Sean. Of course. Because for Big Sean, every inch that Drake takes against Kendrick is an inch of personal revenge for everything he believes was taken from him. It is not about the music. It was never about the music. It is about a decade of watching someone else be called the greatest while you got called a comparison. And then there is Lupe fiasco. This one genuinely stings because Lupe is talented. Lupe is legitimately one of the most creative lyricists hip-hop has ever produced. Which makes what he is doing right now so much more confusing and so much more disappointing. Before Iceman even dropped, Lupe was already signaling allegiance through social media posts hyping up Drake tracks. After it dropped, he went further, recording and releasing his own freestyle over one of the album's beats, rapping well, delivering sharp bars, but doing so entirely in service of the Iceman rollout. Doing so to plant himself inside Drake's orbit. Then came the moment at a show where Lupe forgot his own lyrics and, half joking and half not, told his audience that if labels had treated him differently, if the business had worked out the way it should have, he would be doing stadium tours. He said that out loud. And in a genre where stadium tours are extraordinarily rare, where the most recent rapper to achieve that feat at that level is the same man Lupe has been consistently taking shots at since 2013, that statement is not just bragging. That is a confession. Lupe fiasco is telling you, without quite saying it, that he wishes he were Kendrick Lamar. That he looks at what Kendrick built and believes some version of it should have been his. And because it wasn't, because the industry, the timing, the circumstances conspired against him, the bitterness found a home inside of that comparison. And now it expresses itself as pro-Drake allegiance. Which is genuinely one of the saddest transitions in recent hip-hop history. If you're finding this breakdown valuable and you haven't subscribed yet, this is that moment. Hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. Because the next chapter of this story is going to be one of the most important things happening in hip-hop this year, and you do not want to miss a single video when it lands. Now let's talk about the game. Because this is where things stop being merely disappointing and start being genuinely confusing on a philosophical level. The game passed Kendrick Lamar the torch. That was not a symbolic gesture, it was a public declaration. It was game saying, this man is the future of where we come from. Take everything we built, carry it higher than we ever did. And Kendrick did exactly that. He took it, and he elevated it to a place that nobody from the West Coast had reached in a generation. He put Compton, California, and the legacy of every rapper who ever came before him on stages and in conversations that the culture had never seen before. He did every single thing that passing a torch is supposed to inspire. And then the game, somewhere along the way, decided he couldn't live with what that meant. He couldn't live with the fact that the person he anointed actually became greater than him. And so the torch got quietly taken back, replaced by a red Iceman graphic that now sits as Game's actual profile picture on social media. Game literally changed his profile picture to another grown man's album art. After 20+ years of being one of the most respected West Coast voices in the game. After classic albums. After a resume that most rappers would trade everything for. He changed his face on the internet to Drake's album cover. And he's throwing laughing emojis under posts where Drake disrespects Michael Jackson's legacy. This is the state of things. This is what Iceman has done to people. Not inspired them artistically. Not raised the bar. But given the insecure and the jealous a permission slip to finally say out loud what they've been feeling in private for years. And here's the darker layer beneath all of this. There are credible whispers circulating that Game may have contributed writing to Iceman. The evidence isn't airtight yet, but it's worth paying attention to. The way Drake was treating Game before the album dropped, inviting him onto the private jet, the close proximity, doesn't add up as casual friendship. And certain tracks on Iceman have a structural fingerprint that sounds more Game than it sounds Drake. When you listen to the way metaphors are constructed on certain verses, the way similes are layered, the signature move of saying "I'm great," like specific comparison, that is not historically a Drake construction. That is Game's blueprint. And we know Drake's process. We have seen it documented across multiple instances over multiple years. This would not be a first. It would be a continuation. But perhaps the most intellectually jarring piece of this entire conversation is what is happening in the media ecosystem surrounding all of this. Because it's not just rappers taking shots. It's analysts, pundits, platform builders who have spent years positioning themselves as objective commentators on hip-hop. People who built their audiences by speaking truth to power are now quietly, and in some cases not so quietly, becoming part of the machine trying to rewrite what happened. The most egregious example recently came from DJ Academics, who made a claim that GNX would never have sold 300,000 units in its first week if Drake hadn't filed his lawsuit petition right before the release. That Kendrick Lamar was never a 300,000 unit artist. That the album's success was a product of legal drama, not genuine musical gravity. Let's dismantle that immediately and completely. Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers, an album specifically designed to be difficult, intentionally uncomfortable, not built for commercial accessibility, still cleared close to 300,000 first week. To Pimp a Butterfly in 2015 did 323,000. Damn did over 600,000. These are not numbers propped up by external controversy or legal filings. These are numbers built by one of the most consistently devoted fan bases in the history of popular music. Fan bases that return, that replay, that convert casual listeners into lifelong devotees because the music is genuinely extraordinary. And GNX wasn't just commercially successful in a first-week burst. The songs stayed. They charted for weeks. They created real cultural moments. Reincarnated. Gloria. These weren't songs that spiked and vanished. These were songs that embedded themselves into people's lives. That is the entire opposite of what is happening with Make Them Cry falling off the global chart before 2 weeks are up. To suggest that Kendrick's numbers were artificially inflated by external drama while simultaneously dismissing the evidence of his entire commercial history is not analysis. It is propaganda. And when media personalities with large audiences start performing propaganda disguised as analysis, that is when the culture is in genuine danger. Because not everybody has the context to fact-check it in real time. Not everybody remembers the To Pimp a Butterfly numbers from 2015. Not everybody knows the Mr. Morale first week breakdown. So when someone with a platform confidently announces that Kendrick couldn't have done those numbers on his own, some people believe it. That is how revisionism works. Not through one loud lie, but through 100 confident half-truths delivered by people who sound like they know what they're talking about. And here's the bigger picture that all of these individual pieces are pointing toward. The Iceman rollout, the jealous rappers, the media revisionism, the chart manipulations, the Drake social media posts comparing himself to Michael Jackson, all of it is connected by a single thread of desperation. This entire system, and it is a system, it is coordinated, it has different people playing different roles, exists for one reason. To try and alter the public's memory of what happened between 2024 and 2025 before Kendrick comes back outside. Because when Kendrick drops, and he is going to drop, the odds makers are not putting money on nothing. Everything that has been constructed during this interim period gets stress-tested against reality. Every revisionist talking point gets put up against actual music. Every claim that Drake has won, that Kendrick is underground, that Iceman restored rap, all of it gets measured directly against whatever Kendrick Lamar delivers when he finally speaks again. And the people building this propaganda machine know that. Which is why they're working so hard right now. Because this window, between Kendrick's last statement and his next one, is the only window where any of this distortion can live without being immediately destroyed by the contrast. And Kendrick doesn't even need to address Drake directly to make all of this evaporate. He just needs to make a great album. Which, based on his last several decades of output, is essentially his default setting. If he drops a deeply conceptual record, the type of album that rewards multiple listens and reveals new layers every time you return to it, the comparison to Iceman will be automatic and it will be brutal. Not because people are forced to make it, but because quality is self-evident. You cannot manufacture it. You cannot bot it onto a chart. You cannot sustain it through a social media campaign. It either lives in the music or it doesn't. And that is exactly what all the rappers defending Drake, all the media figures rewriting history, and all the fans throwing fire emojis under propaganda posts are actually afraid of. Not a diss track. Not a direct response. Just Kendrick Lamar making music that is undeniably, incomparably better than what they've been celebrating. Because that will say more in silence than any bars could ever say out loud. Here's what all of this ultimately comes down to when you strip away the noise, the chart numbers, the social media posts, and the coordinated revisionism. This is a story about what happens when a genre's biggest commercial force decides that victory is something you declare rather than something you earn. Drake dropped 3 projects. He took the top 3 chart spots simultaneously. He broke records for first-day streaming numbers. He did everything that the infrastructure of modern music allows you to do when you have unlimited resources and a machine built over 15 years. And then within 10 days, the music started disappearing from the very charts it was supposed to own. Because infrastructure cannot replace resonance. Resources cannot manufacture legacy. And no amount of coordinated media support can make people press play on something that did not move them the first time. Meanwhile, the man who hasn't said a single word since his last project, who gave no interviews, made no announcements, dropped no teasers, is still the most talked about figure in the conversation. His next album, which may or may not exist yet, is already a betting favorite. His odds are climbing on platforms that make their money by being right. And the people who claim he's done, who claim he needed Drake, who claim GNX was a charity case propped up by legal drama, those people are building their arguments on foundations that the actual data, the actual chart history, and the actual cultural record cannot support. The truth is not complicated. One artist makes music people go back to. The other makes music people play once and move on from. One artist's legacy grows every time the conversation about hip-hop gets serious. The other's requires constant maintenance, constant redirection, constant armies of supporters to keep the illusion credible. And when Kendrick Lamar finally steps back into the light, whenever that is, however it happens, every single one of these carefully constructed illusions is going to be exposed to the kind of direct comparison that no propaganda system in the world can survive. The countdown has already started. And judging by the desperation of the people trying to stop it, they feel it too. So let me know in the comments, what do you believe Kendrick's next move is? Is this year the year? Is it a concept album, a response, or something nobody is even predicting yet? And do you think Drake actually tries to counter that release when it comes, or does the experience of the last 2 years tell him everything he needs to know about how that ends? Drop it all below. This comment section is going to be one of the most interesting ones we've had. And before you go, if you made it all the way to this point and you're still not subscribed, I genuinely want you to think about what you're missing between these videos. This channel is not going to slow down. The stories are only getting bigger. The analysis is only getting sharper. And the next chapter of this entire saga is going to be one of the most defining moments in hip-hop in years. You don't want to get a notification about it after the fact. You want to be here when it happens. Subscribe, hit the bell, and get ready. Because whatever is coming next, it's going to change everything. The ice is melting. And what's underneath it is going to be very cold for a very different reason.